Well, hello, everyone. We got the gain there a little better? Okay, great. We've been having some unusual weather up where I live in Menifee. I live right across the wheat field from Robin Weber. We live in an area where actually there are Class 1 tornadoes here in California that occur, where the desert air meets the Pacific air and makes these giant thunderheads. And so it's been very, very hot as well. But you know what happened the other day? It was a neat sign. I look for it every year. And give me a nod if you've had this happen. I call it the feast breeze. It can be really, really hot in late August, early September, but there'll be this little wisp of a little cool breeze, even within the heat. And the shadows change a little bit too, if you notice. The shadows seem to be changing. And when I feel the feast breeze, I know, hey, Feast of Tabernacles, right around the corner. So I felt the feast breeze this week. I was kind of excited about that. But something I was thinking in regards to weather as well. Why don't they put in the Escondido Festival Guide, do not bring rain gear, not necessary. So I'm sure there's people who go and they're bringing their umbrellas or galoshes or whatever. It's not going to rain in Escondido during the Feast of Tabernacles. We have great weather. And remember the song, how did it go? It never rains in Southern California, right? I mean, we get so freaked out here in San Diego when it rains. They actually have team storm coverage for the news, right? And it goes something like this, KFMB, Channel 8, storm coverage. And now live rain storm coverage at La Jolla Beach, live with Tammy Trujillo.
John, there's these gray puffy objects floating in the sky. And these round, wet, watery objects are hitting me right in my face.
We're very spoiled here in San Diego, and a little weird, certainly. But anyway, the seasons, the passing of the weather and all that, it has something to do with the festival and how we observe them and bring in the harvest and all that. And what I want to address is the 7 holy days. We like to individualize them, compartmentalize them a lot, but they really do stand together, and they're themed together. 7 itself is a number that represents completion. All right? And if you think about this, they got to stand all together. Because what good would the Feast of Trumpets say, representing the return of Jesus Christ? What good is that if we didn't have salvation? If we didn't have the Passover lamb, Jesus Christ, who died for us? What meaning would there be with the trumpets? And so, in a way, they're a complete package together. Even though I know, as we observe them, we focus on them very, very individually. But there's a lot of crossover when it comes to the feast. A lot of crossover. Passover and Day of Atonement have a lot of things that cross over. I'll give you an example. Now, we know Christ died during the Passover season. But there was Barabbas. There was going to be a choice made by the priest between Barabbas and Jesus. Now, Jesus was the Son of God. But you know what's interesting? Barabbas, what does that mean? Bar means like son of. Abba, a son of the Father, a criminal, but another son of the Father. Both put before the priests, one to live, one to be set free. I don't know if you're ahead of me on this or not, but that sounds an awful lot like a Day of Atonement typology. In fact, Pilate, after he made the decision, he washes his hands. And that's what the priests had to do too, was wash. And yet, this Day of Atonement scenario is playing out in the Passover season. So my point is, as an introduction, is that there's a lot of crossover between the various different feasts and a lot of webs and weaves, even though we tend to observe them and focus on them very singularly. I would like to say this, though. There are some that are trying to say that the azazel is Jesus. I know there's arguments for that. But I don't buy it. I don't buy it. And again, I think just this scenario that we have 2 sons of the Father. One was set free into the wilderness. One was killed. The righteous one was killed. We find this theme throughout the Bible. I'll give you a couple of examples. There was Isaac and Ishmael. One was led to the desert, and one was almost symbolically sacrificed. Or how about Cain and Abel? Abel was a type of the Azazel, led out to the wilderness, to the desert, as we'll call it the antagonist. And Cain, the righteous one, was killed. And so I don't go for that. You're bound to run into that. I know there's some people, even in Church of God circles, are trying to push this idea that the Azazel goat is also symbolic of Jesus. I don't see it. But anyway, in that premise in mind, about this holisticness of the holy days, I want to talk about the Book of Ruth. Because within the Book of Ruth, even though the Book of Ruth was read historically in the temple at Pentecost, you can find all the holy days in typology mentioned in this very, very short book. It's only 4 chapters long. And we'll be spending a lot of time today in the Book of Ruth, so you might want to mark that. The Book of Ruth was, again, it was read in the temple. That was the book they read at Pentecost. And the Book of Ruth, it's kind of a romantic book, too. It's about a romance. And I'd like to mention something. This weekend is Terry and our 24th wedding anniversary. We've known each other 25 years. And I'm not very much of a romantic guy. I got a square head and, strong back and a weak mind, German guy. We're not always known as the most romantic of people. But the Book of Ruth is a romantic story. And without jumping too far ahead here, the Book of Ruth is a romance story about Jesus Christ and His church. And all of us, as the church, we play the role of the woman. And the romance that we have with our husband, which is Jesus Christ. Christ is the kinsman redeemer. And Ruth, the book of redemption, is not just for the literal characters of that book. It is also our story. Now, in the genealogy of Christ, there were 4 women mentioned in the book of Matthew. Ruth was one of them. From Ruth came Jesus Christ. Of the 4 women that are there was Tamar, and she was the one who posed as a prostitute to Judah. Then there was Rahab, the prostitute. Remember the story in Jericho? And she helped with the spies and the wall and all of that. But not a woman of high reputation. There's Ruth, and she was a Gentile. And remember, in that culture, that was considered outcast, dirty, taboo, untouchable. And there's also Bathsheba, mentioned in the genealogy of Christ. And here again is a woman who had an affair with the king. All right? All of these women had strikes against them, whether it was because they were Gentiles or harlots. And yet, all of us, as a future bride of Christ, who of us cannot say that we don't have the strikes in our life, the foulness of our life, the partaking of sin that we have done? Not every one of us, certainly. And yet, our future groom, husband, Jesus Christ, can still find beauty in us and have a use for us. And so, a quick point here, I don't care what you've done in this life. I don't care what you've done. I don't care what you've said. I don't care how guilty you feel. Let me tell you, God sees something very, very important in you, enough to call you to want to marry you. By the way, I do want to mention, some people get into Bible versions, King James or New King James and all that. What I'm going to be using today is the Lift the Flap Bible. And it's kind of neat, really. I checked this out. It's got little things you kind of lift these here and all that. I'm going to use that today. Here's Adam and Eve. You know what I always like about these kids' Bibles is with like Adam and Eve in the garden. There's always that fortuitous branch. I mean, just in the nick of time, to protect, to prevent a little embarrassment there. So, but anyway, no, I'll be using, in all seriousness, I'll be using the New King James Version Bible here. But let's go over to Ruth and Ruth 1. And it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. And oftentimes in the Bible, God uses famines to move people. There's these times when God just needs people to be moving somewhere, and people oftentimes, they don't do anything unless there's enough pain. But God oftentimes uses famine to move people. He used famine to move the household of Jacob down into Egypt. And so here is a situation where God's will was being played out by using a famine. And a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. And that name, Naomi, means pleasant, interestingly enough. And the names of the 2 sons were Mahon and Chilon. Now, I looked these up. Elimelech means God is my king, like I just said, means pleasant. But now listen to this. Mahlon and Keon. I don't know how they name kids in these days, but Mahlon means unhealthy. Can you imagine that? I had a baby, and let's go, I'm unhealthy. But Keon, the next one, his name means puny. All right? They could not have made it in my high school. I'm going to tell you that right now. There's no way. All right? Can you imagine? Here comes unhealthy, and here comes puny. And I don't know if those boys knew how to fight or box or a little bit like that, but if they had high school in those days, those kids had to be pretty tough with having lived with. It's like Boy Named Sue. You remember that song? You know, puny and unhealthy. So these boys had to learn how to fight. Well, we drop down, though, in verses 7, 8, and 9. They went out from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, this is Naomi, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters, now go return each to your mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. And the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. And she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices, and they wept. And they said to her, surely we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Don't go with me. Are there still sons in your womb that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. And if I should say I have hope, even I should have a husband tonight and should also bear sons. So here's what happens. Another typology of the Day of Atonement. One went and one went back to the desert. The one sister stayed. She loved Naomi so much. She was willing to forsake everything. Her culture, her upbringing, her religion, all of it, to go with Naomi. But one went back to the desert. Again, a Day of Atonement typology that you see here. And verse 16 and 17. Ruth said this. She said, entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you will go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And where you die, that's where I will die. And that's where I will be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. Can you imagine? That is a tremendous commitment that Ruth has for Naomi, and a real testimony to the love that she had for her. Over in verse 20, Naomi says, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt with me very bitterly. And Mara means bitter. She's saying, I am desolate, I'm fruitless, I'm desolate, I am bitter. I'll make a speculation. I wonder if Naomi represents Israel returning to the promised land after the diaspora. And after many generations, she went out full. Naomi saying, I went out full and I returned desolate. I don't know, but perhaps there is some connection there. Ruth 2, verse 1. Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. So Ruth and the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him, in whose sight I may find favor. And she said to her, go ahead, my daughter. And she left and went out and gleaned in the field after the reapers. Of course, the custom was in those days, you only had one cut. You were only supposed to go through the fields once. You weren't supposed to go down there and shave it down a second time. And of course, I'm sure you have all heard about the idea that you round the corners. You kind of leave the corners there for people to glean for the poor, for the widows and for the poor. And you were only to make one pass over that grain. And that was kind of a social security system, if you will, at that time. And that's what Ruth was going to do, was to go and to take her part in what we'll call the social charity of that time, and to glean after the reapers. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, the Lord be with you, and the Lord bless you. And then Boaz said to his servant, he's looking out there at all the different people working in the fields, and he spots this young woman. The Bible says, who is this young woman? And it says happened. I don't think it just happened. It was destiny. And I don't think he just kind of said it like this, like who is that young girl over there? She probably was very, very attractive. And people who work in the fields, they're not, even to this day, they're not known to be the most attractive of people, right? And so I think, I'll do a Lussenheide paraphrase. I think Boaz was more like this. Hoo-ah! Who's this gal out here in the field? She's beautiful. And anyway, so he said, hey, he had an interest there, and he said, hey, make sure that she goes and works in my field. Please let me glean and gather, verse 7, after the reapers. And so she came and continued till morning as such. Now, verse 9. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? So, again, fields can be very dangerous places. He didn't want her wandering around and so forth. And he told his best men, he says, keep an eye on her, keep her safe, and make sure she doesn't go to any other fields. Have I commanded the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. And she fell on her face, and she bowed down on the ground and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? And again, remember, we were all foreigners once upon a time with God. And God saw the beauty within us. Boaz answered and said to her, it's been fully reported to me all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you left your father and your mother in the land of your faith, of your birth, and have come to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given you by the Lord of God of Israel. And then she said, let me find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like your maidservants. And Boaz said at her mealtime, come here and eat of the bread, and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. Now, I looked this word up. There's another typology here. Here is a reference to a Passover type of situation. The word vinegar here actually means wine. Take the bread and take the wine. And there's a covenant proposal here, in a sense. We see a Passover type of typology played out right here, where it says, dip your bread and with the wine. And so she sat beside the reapers, and he passed the grain to her, and she ate and was satisfied. And then down in verse 17, it says, so she gleaned in the field until evening, and beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. All right? I looked this up. Ephah, interesting. She gleaned a lot. It was a truckload. It's the equivalent of 7 bushels or more. It's a truckload. You know, I always pictured it in my mind that maybe she had like a little basket and she got that. I'm sure that Boaz was out there making sure that there was some extra stalks kind of laid out. He told the guys, right? And she gleaned a truckload. Plus, she was probably a good worker. All right? Let's go over into Ruth 3. And you remember the story where Naomi kind of gave some instructions. She's an older woman. She'd been around the block a little bit. And she saw that, hey, wait a minute. There's no way she's coming home with a truckload of wheat. And there's something going on here. He's interested in her. And took an older woman to kind of set her straight what's going on. And so they plotted a little bit. She said, wash yourself, verse 3, and anoint yourself. Put on your best garment and go down to the threshing floor. But not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Some good advice there, though, women. Don't bug your guy when he's eating and drinking. All right? Now, Terry and I, again, 24 years we've been married. Men have caves. I have a little man cave. All right? It could be out in the garage. Maybe some guys like to do woodworking. For me, I like to go home and look at the sports scores and look at my email. And I need about 20 minutes to unwind. All right? And don't bother me until I get that out of the way. Then I can do anything. You can tell me about all the problems. The water heater blew up, and Kyle's doing this and that or whatever. And I'm ready. So, again, a lot of wisdom here with Naomi, saying, hey, after a long day, and this Boaz guy's in there, and he's had to deal with the field workers and this and that and that. Give him a chance to eat. Let him have a beer, or what have they used in those days. And then you can kind of bring business to the guy. At least that's the way I see it. And when he lies down, you shall notice the place where he lies, verse 4. You shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do. And she said to her, all that you say to me, I will do. Verse 6. So she went down to the threshing floor, did according to all that her mother-in-law instructed her. And after Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was cheerful, again, that little glass of wine, that beer helps. He went to lie down at the end of the heap of the grain, and she came softly uncovered his feet, and she lay down. And now it happened at midnight that the man was startled. That would be a little scary. I get scared when a cat jumps on the bed in the middle of the night. All right, let alone it's somebody there uncovering your feet. And there a woman was lying at his feet, and he said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a near kinsman. Now, let me tell you something. That's not a proposition. That was not something that was unseemly. Some people, modern critics, try to make this into some illicit situation. It wasn't. In fact, where it says, take the covering over me, it's really saying this. It says, spread your hem over me. And again, there's some cultural differences. Hems don't mean that much to us these days. But that, in that era and at that time, even up to the time of Jesus, on your hem is where your authority was worn. You would actually have like a raised embroidery as such. And it kind of was like your business card. It was your title. All right? In fact, you could even take this and impress it on clay, and it would be considered a legal document. And remember when David cut the hem of Saul? It was more than just cutting on his cloth. He cut the hem. He was literally saying, I challenge your authority. I challenge your badge. I'm cutting your badge. I'm cutting your chevrons, in the military. I'm cutting your rank right there. That was a very aggressive thing that David did. And same type of symbolism. But remember in the New Testament, there was the woman that had the issue of blood. All right? What did she reach for? Again, it was lost on our culture. But she went and she reached up for the hem on Jesus. What she was saying is, I acknowledge your authority. She was submitting to it, saying, I know that you have authority. So again, something about hems that we don't quite understand in this culture. And she should say, redeem me as a near kinsman, and I recognize your authority. Like, bring me underneath your hem. And so in verse 16, to make the deal, we'll call it earnest money deposit, like when you buy a house. Boaz puts forth 6 measures of grain as a message to Naomi that he's going to complete the task. Because think about this, why 6? 7 would represent completeness. He's saying, I'm going to go this far, but there's one more thing I've got to do, all right, to complete the deal. So here's 6, and I'll bring the 7th until it's done. And in Ruth 4, we read about how Boaz has to redeem Ruth from Because he's not the nearest kinsman. There was someone else before. Just like, in a sense, we flirted around with Satan for a while too, didn't we? In our lives before conversion, before the kinsman redeemer. And so you go down, verse 2 of chapter 4. 10 men, elders, they're going to have witnesses. It's a legal proceeding. And a near kinsman. And he's trying to redeem her. And then Boaz said in verse 5, on the day to the person unnamed, by the way, that was first in line to Ruth, on the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy from it Ruth the Moabitess. And notice this now. Now, Boaz wants to make the deal. And notice how he describes Ruth. A couple chapters earlier, it's this beautiful lady who's this gal. But he wants to make the deal here. All right? And so you always want to downsell. So he says, it's Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead. He's not trying to play her up as something really good. And you would have to raise up the name of the dead onto your inheritance. All right, so he's trying to drive the deal, trying to sell that you don't want her. All right, obviously because he had an interest for himself. And so here was the custom at the time to seal the deal. Was they handed a shoe over to make the deal. All right? And there's something about Middle Eastern cultures interesting. They're into shoes. I know some of you are into shoes, but over there they're really, really into shoes. And I remember when we were over there in Iraq and they were tearing down the statue of Saddam Hussein. Do you remember that? When the tank went in there and we had the big statue of Saddam Hussein, they tore it down. When that thing hit the ground, everybody took off their shoe. And he started pounding on this statue. All right? There's something about the shoe that is very meaningful to them. All right? And let me ask you something. When do we mess with shoes here in the Church of God? There's a time we actually have something to do with shoes and making a deal, making a transaction, a spiritual transaction. It is at the Passover when we wash each other's feet. We kind of take off our shoe and kind of hand it across, if you know what I'm saying. We're making a covenant with one another. All right? So I think that there's a richness here. We see a Passover typology in this idea of passing the shoe. And we can apply that redemption and a contract and covenant with our Lord when we do the foot washing. Very similar to what happened here between Boaz and the near kinsman. I want to make a connection here between Ruth and the Feast of Tabernacles. Here in Ruth 4, verse 11, it says this, all the people who were at the gate and elder said, we are a witness. The Lord made the woman who's coming to your house make her like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel. And may you prosper, and may you be famous in Jerusalem. And may your house be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore of Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. There's going to be a famous descendant. A famous descendant will come from this. At least that is what the blessing that was said from the witnesses that were there. And we can see there's this prophecy over in Micah 5, verse 2. And realize that, again, the city where this happened, Bethlehem. The city of Bethlehem. Micah 5, verse 2 says this, but you, Bethlehem, though you are little amongst the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be the ruler in Israel, whose going forth had been from old and from everlasting. Therefore, they shall give them up. Anyway, this is a prophecy about the Messiah. The Messiah, the King of Israel, will come from Israel, from Bethlehem, rather. This little city where Ruth and Boaz have developed this relationship and this marriage. All right? The famous seed of Bethlehem, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem. And when was he born? We know it was during the Feast of Tabernacles. And I'll rapidly go through this in Luke 1. At least there's very good evidence that Jesus was born in the fall season, not at Christmas time. Interestingly enough, if Jesus was born at that time, which I believe, was under the sun sign of Virgo. Why did the astrologers, quote-unquote astrologers, probably priests from the lost 10 tribes, looking at the 70 weeks prophecy, knowing the Messiah is near to come, that they knew something was up. Well, Jesus was born during what they call the sun. The sun was in the constellation of Virgo. Virgo is the virgin. They knew the prophecy that the virgin would conceive. And that happens at the fall. If Jesus, not to get into astrology, because we're not into that, but if Jesus was born at Christmas, what his astrological sun sign would be? It would be Capricorn, the goat. I don't think that's good. That doesn't make for good symbolism. Might be good for maybe Nimrod or Satan. But in Luke 1, verse 5, we see the course of Abijah is mentioned. And we can figure out when Christ was born because Zechariah the priest was in the course of Abijah. There was 24 courses per year, and the priest served for 2 weeks. Now, all the priests did an all play during the Feast of Tabernacles and Days of Unleavened Bread. All the priests served. But we know the course of Abijah when that occurred. And Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, came home from his course of Abijah. That's found in Luke 1, verse 5. And that is when Elizabeth became pregnant. So somewhere around Pentecost, Elizabeth is pregnant. And if we jump over to Luke 1, verse 36, we see that Mary, the mother of Jesus, comes to Elizabeth in her 6th month. So where are we? Let's do the math here. Elizabeth gets pregnant somewhere around Pentecost, somewhere around June, and Mary meets her somewhere 6 months later, according to Scripture, somewhere around December, January, and that's when Mary conceives. All right? Now, 9 months gestation from December, January, where are we? We're going to be right around Feast of Tabernacles time. All right? And additionally, we know Jesus, in Luke 3:23, he was about 30 years old when he started his ministry. He served for 3.5 years, cut off in the midst of the week, like it says in Daniel 70 weeks prophecy. So Jesus died in the spring. Take any year you want. Jesus was about 33.5 years old. Take any year you want to pick from a spring season. Go back 33.5 years. Where are you? You're right again. You're right back there. Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, Feast of Tabernacles. All right? In Luke 2:7, no room at the inn. We've all heard that many, many times. Make sure you have your festival reservations in because you'll end up that way too, right? At least in the old days when we used to have 10,000 people at different feast sites. Maybe it's a little easier now. But Jesus was born at the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, now why did I go through that whole labyrinth of reasoning to show that? All right? Because in Luke 2, verse 15, let's take a look at this quickly. Something very interesting happens when Jesus is born. And so it was when the angels had gone away from them and into heaven that the shepherds said to one another, "Let us now go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has come to pass, which the Lord has made known to us." The angels had announced the birth of Jesus Christ. And they came with haste and found Mary and Joseph and found the baby laying in a manger. Well, whose fields were? Where did they find Jesus Christ? In the manger. I propose in the very same fields that Ruth was gleaning wheat and barley. The very same fields where Ruth and Boaz found that romance was the very same fields these shepherds came across the baby Jesus. This book, folks, is an amazing book. I didn't grow up as a believer. God called me very young, and I was kind of skeptical about the Bible and religion, those type of things. When I started finding the threads, these tremendous threads of 66 books of 40 different authors written over 3,000 plus years, there was something mystical. I said, something's going on here, let alone the fulfillment of prophecies and empires and all that. There's something here. And the story thread of Ruth, which indeed was a prophecy, includes the plan of salvation. It shows us the 7 holy days. It gives us the hope and testimony that He lives. Jesus Christ lives. God the Father lives. They're real. And we can have faith in that. We can have faith that their plans are going to work out in spite of any of the problems we're facing in this life, in spite of the discouragements, in spite of the battle of the flesh that we have. There's someone in control. There's a grand master, and we're a part of that plan. It's certainly exciting. Have faith in that. And I want to wish all of you certainly a great Holy Day season.